In the constantly changing world of fundability, the big question is this: how are entrepreneurs and real estate investors like us, ones who want to grow our businesses and who are tired of paying for really expensive alternative lending, how do we tap into the most inexpensive money available and do it without the hassle of typical borrowing? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. Welcome to the Get Fundable podcast with your host, Merrill Chandler.
Merrill Chandler, your host of Get Fundable podcast. The whole point and purpose of this podcast is for you to learn what you need so you can get fundable. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to recession-proof your credit profile. There are some really killer ways in which you can send positive messages to your current lenders and dodge any bullets that may come at you as a result of a credit crunch or a recession or a contraction of the economy. So when we come back, we will get started. Welcome back, everybody. Merrill Chandler, the Get Fundable podcast, where you find out how to get fundable. So as I said, we're going to be discussing how to recession-proof your credit profile and your borrower profile, right? Credit profile is technically what comes on what you can read in your consumer disclosures in your credit report. We, of course, recommend myfico.com because it has 28 consumer borrower-facing scores. But a borrower profile is a little bit bigger than that. So we're going to be discussing topics from each one of them. Now, why do I say recession-proof? I don't know if you were around during 2008, 2007, the whole run-up, the values of real estate, mortgages. If you could fog a mirror, they were giving out mortgages. The problem is in 2008, all of a sudden, there became too many of the mortgage-backed securities. It was like one of those, you've seen the little sand, they have little sand art, right? And there's liquid and there's sand in it. It's about this wide, and you turn it on its spindle, and then all of a sudden the bottom starts falling out, right? And then pretty soon, and it makes this beautiful, the mortgage crisis wasn't beautiful, but it makes all of this beautiful little designs as the bottom of the bottom sand particles start moving down through the liquid, and ultimately everything collapses. So if you've seen those, you know what I'm talking about. The entire bottom fell out of the mortgages because they put frosting on SHIT, right? There were some described it as lipstick on a pig, but they were saying that mortgages were A paper when in fact the tranche, the collection of that grade, just had enough A paper to pass muster, but all of the other paper were people with 500 credit scores and no jobs. They're ninja loans, right? No income, no job or assets. What the hell, right? Well, in that, now remember, I've been doing this for by now it's 27 years, since 1992. And as we went through this recession, the first thing that happened is all the credit card, the banks, but remember, banks are mortgage bankers, they're securities bankers, they're retail bankers, and they are credit card issuers. So they did all of the things necessary to protect their interests from loss. Now, what is it they're trying to protect themselves from? Well, borrower behavior dictates that in any kind of outrageous or when the economy suffers, people lose their jobs. And so they're going to use every resource to feed their families. They're going to use every resource to stay in their mortgages, pay their bills, do everything they can to keep some degree of normalcy. Now, this is totally expected behavior. So lenders, with FICO assisting them, and we'll cover that as well, they contract. So if you have a $20,000 credit card or a credit line, business cards, business lines, it doesn't matter. If you, let's say you have a 20,000, they are likely to either reduce that limit or close the account. Why? Because they want you to pay back the money that you borrowed, but they don't want to let you use that money anymore because of the likelihood of you using that money. You lose your job and use that money to do things that credit was not designed to do, or the things that they don't want you doing with your credit cards. Paying bills, buying food, right? Buying food as part of a to get rewards and points, no harm, no foul. But in a recession, they're gonna withdraw, they're gonna contract and say, you don't get to use credit because you don't have a job. You don't get to use our money. And remember, in the boot camp, guys, all my funding hackers out there who are listening, everybody who's read the book, and you guys are mini funding hackers, right? Because you get the deep dive in a bunch of these concepts. Every one of you that have gone through one of the trainings, etc., learn that borrower behaviors are trackable at every step. And lenders know from time immemorial that you're going to use available credit to save your skins. Lenders know that you're going to save your skins with credit, but as we learn in the boot camp, they know it's their money. You think, because we all have a good heart, right? I'm just going to presuppose we all have a good heart. We're not trying to game the system. You and I have been, we believe that we're going to feed our families because we're going to get a new job and we're going to get, times are rough and our spouse hasn't been laid off yet, or our children are working and they're throwing in, and we were credit worthy. So because we're credit worthy, we, in the back of our minds, believe this money is ours. And then lenders don't believe that for a second. They don't spend a second believing that that money is yours. So what they do is, in times of recession, in times of economic, I'm going to call it contraction. It was kind of collapse last time, but in these times, they don't want you to have access to their money because you're going to be using it to survive rather than make the money. So the likelihood of default, and bankruptcies went through the roof, guys. Defaults went through the roof because so many of our fellow citizens went bankrupt. They lost their jobs. They lost everything. Well, we're going to discuss in this episode how to send the right kinds of messages to minimize those contractions on your account or completely eliminate them. So let's get started. First thing I want to talk about in FICO 19, FICO 2019, a few months ago, at the recording of this, a few months ago, I went to one of the, because I was a CEO, I was able to attend a high level for executives. I'm not a programmer, I'm not a coder, and so they have classes and seminars for those. But I was seen as an executive, and so I was invited to be able to attend the executive level, like the strategic planning part of this. And they introduced, it was awesome. They introduced one of the vice presidents of the of FICO over scores, introduced a something that they're working on. I referred to this once before in a podcast, but it's the FSSI, the FICO Score Stress Indicator. Financial Score Stress Indicator. And so the whole point of FSSI was to determine, and her presentation deck started out with this thing. It's like, do you know which 680s are going to get through the recession? Do you? And what this new scoring model is, and we're staying in touch with our people, our liaison, so as it's developed, we get to at least learn more and more. It was just barely on. It's not even being tested yet. It's being designed. So in 18 months at the next FICO, we have we're going to find out what the next steps are. But this stress indicator score is designed to say which of the people who have 680s, because it happens to 720s and people with 760s, people with 800s. But the risk begins at people with 680 or below, because 680 isn't a horrible score. It's just not super fundable. So that's their cutoff. And they're saying, Sally was saying, which of your 680s can you trust? Which of your 680s can you trust? And then that goes all the way up to your 800s. The way they, and so I grabbed her, she finished her presentation. I was literally bolting out of there right after to stop and talk to her about borrower education, everything that I'm about. And in this conversation, she said again that they were just barely starting the process, but it was designed for economic stress circumstances like a recession or a near depression. And by the way, just as a hint, when somebody, you can be depressed, right? Emotionally, in your soul, in your psyche. But the language I use is, I don't think I don't know, maybe I've been depressed. But I have been recessed. So I say, no, I'm not in a depression. I'm in a recession, right? For my personal psyche. Well, the same thing happens to us as can be certain states go through this, and definitely our economy. Lots of people say over the next year or two, there's going to be a reset. That's a very simple, kind way of saying the rug might get pulled out from underneath us. In most markets, it's true definitely in Salt Lake City. In most markets, the price of homes is more. It's like 10 to 20% more than it was when everything failed. Okay, so everybody predicts. When I say everybody, most individuals predict there's going to be some sort of a reset. In that reset, I guarantee you that this FSS score is going to be in play, and I guarantee you, or they're going to use it to test and test the markets, but you can stop the process of this contraction when it comes to you, or significantly limit it. I can't guarantee that we'll stop it altogether, but I went through this once in 2008 and supported my clients in being able to because the rules of fundability are the rules of fundability. It didn't start with 2008. We didn't just design everything because of this collapse. These are fundamentally sound financial principles. So let's go through some of them. And now that I've introduced the stress indicator score, the financial stress indicator, we'll be able to kind of to paint a picture of what this means to you over the next months and or years. Okay. First of all, in the boot camp, in my book, we talk about FICO and lender software measuring your performance data. We call them borrower behaviors, but FICO and lenders call them internal performance data, internal to the lender. So if you have a Chase card, if you have an American Express card, they are measuring your behavior. Okay, the very behavior that you exhibit is what's going to determine whether or not they can trust you in a time of financial stress on a macro scale, on a countrywide scale. It doesn't go into whether or not you are going to lose your job. We can't predict various sectors are going to lose their jobs. But for those of you who are the entrepreneurs, the real estate investors, the wild ones, right? The ones where we're always out there pushing the boundaries, pushing the limits. If you develop a qualified fundable entity, as I've discussed in previous episodes and in my bootcamp, if you create a qualified fundable entity and that fundable entity has traction besides your W-2, or instead of your W-2. If you've done the right things, you're sending markers and triggers to the software that says this is a professional borrower. Now, I've said those words. Go back and listen to the podcast. Better yet, if you haven't attended, go to the damn boot camp. GetFundableBootcamp.com. You've got we literally fill out paperwork and do worksheets on how fundable you are. And in there, we find out what your tolerances are and the messages you're sending with your revolving accounts and the messages you're sending to lenders regarding your installment loans. If we send the right messages for long enough, and we're losing time now. Remember, what's the look back period? Here's a quick quiz. Shout it out to while you're at the gym or while you're walking down the street. 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months. 24 months. If you have not done these behaviors for significant amount of time, you have a greater likelihood of having them lower your limits or close your accounts, depending on how risky your behavior has been. Remember, if everything's fine and your behaviors are within tolerances, they're going to still continue to collect your interest payments and or let you use the cards because your card swipes pay their bills. But if you're sending, remember, everything's a target, right? There's the bullseye, which is the true FICO 40, 24-month look-back period perfection with a perfect borrower identity and a perfect QFE identity. Once you hit those targets, you will, where we want to age those messages. Minimum 3 months, 6 months is nice. 12 months is really the bottom line that's going to protect those limits and how we're treated by lenders in case of stress. But if you make it to that 24 months, and I don't know when the reset's coming, but if you come back and you have 24 months of spectacular behavior of all the stuff we've already talked about, but certain limits, 10 to 20% traffic, never more than 38% utilization on the reporting period, where you are paying fastidiously on the due date to zero, right? If you and you're having auto draft coming on that date, if you have 24 months of spectacular borrower behaviors, one of two things are going to happen. A, you're not going to be caught with your balances up and where you're upside down on an account. Let me tell you a story about numerous clients who was not implementing their optimization plans. They were not being professional borrowers, and so one of them had a $15,000 limit out of a $20,000 account. And they're like, because they had not finished setting up some of their business things. They were not serious about setting up their QFE, qualified fundable entity, and which is the receptacle that lenders are willing to pour dollars into. So I believe it was Wells Fargo lowered their limit from $20,000 to $10,000. But they had a $15,000 balance. So now they were upside down by 50% of their new limit. Now, I said this in one of our podcasts a while back, but at FICO, one of our questions were, how do you account for lenders dropping a limit under their current balance? I understand lenders needing to protect their interests, but how do you account for it? And straight out of Ethan Dornhelm's, the chief scientist at FICO, he's a vice president. He said, we don't. If their new limit is beneath or lower than their current reported balance, they are going to take the most significant hit that can come against an open positive reporting trade line. It means that you literally were allowed, even though this isn't what happened, the way the algorithm works is that you're allowed $10,000 and you spent $15,000, 50% above that of your allowable limit. So you're a bad borrower and crash the score. Not just the score, but you completely trash your fundability. So rule number one to protect yourself in the recession: follow the traffic and utilization guidelines that we've presented in all the podcasts, and go find out about how fundable you are in the boot camp so that you can apply this information to your entire profile. Okay, find out how your fundability index so you can have actionable intel. But the thing is that you need 10 to 20% traffic on open credit cards, and tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 credit cards. Never more than 38% on the reporting period. We prefer, I've told you, 7% on the reporting period or on the reporting date. That's it. Then one of two things: if they do reduce from a 20 to a 15, you change your behavior to match 10 to 20% of 15, not 10 to 20% of 20. Does that make sense? Then you start aging that behavior with that new limit. If they give it to you, you look like gold. They're going to be the ones who raise that limit after you've proven that you don't need to use those funds. Right? Now, the other thing we'll get to our kind of our emergency crash program here in just a moment, because your borrower profile is the single greatest asset. I call it the goose that lays the golden egg, but it's the single greatest financial asset you have. So you need to not just use it appropriately, keep your balances and to zero, keep your reporting date to 7%, and don't put more traffic on it than 38% or 10 to 20% if you want to be in the bullseye. So there's that. But now let's talk about how to protect the asset. So one of the things I coach, especially some of my valet clients, and I work on myself as well as my children. I've taught this principle to every one of my children. So there's I'm just going to share it with you, and you decide whether it's a thing or not. Some people put aside money for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. I'm in Salt Lake City. The LDS folk here, they have 2 years 2 years of food supply, et cetera, et cetera. So there's radical and there's conservative versions of this. But most people I know will save money, and when they save money, that's in a bank account, mattress, your safe, wherever you put it. But that money actually can be used for fixing the car or any other emergency. And what I teach my clients, my students, and live by for myself is I advance credits inside of a creditor. Now, here's what's cool. Meaning, I pay way over. I have experimented with the process of having credits inside of all of my like a mortgage. So you are advance payments, because you can choose this, as we've discussed both in my book and the boot camp. You can advance payments. You can add more payments to your mortgage that don't go on the end. It literally just is 6 months worth of payments. And you could stop making payments and they will use that credit with you. So it's like a savings account for every single lender that you're working with. Cell phone bills you can do. Electric, gas, all of your utilities. You put money on those accounts, pay more than the bill is worth, so that you get a minimum minimum of 3 months. Now I'm going with the FICO modeling. 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. I don't know if it's necessary to go 24 months, but a minimum of 3 months of what your average cell phone bill is, what your utilities are, your mortgage payment, your auto payment or loan or lease, your credit cards, so that you can charge them up, but they have a credit. Now, I do not have actionable intel on that. This does not harm your credit profile, because when they draft the account, they're drafting it from a credit. So FICO is triggering on every single one of these. So, but I don't know that there are opportunities to get prepay, like we talk in the boot camp about auto loans, where you very well may earn prepaid points because you paid 6 months in advance. So the idea is, let's take your auto loan, your mortgage or anything, you get 6 months in advance, and then you go back to, or 6 months worth of savings on account, it's called a credit, and then you go back to paying your monthly payment. So it always stays there with 6 months. Now, if you show that you have 6 months on your average, on the average traffic, because check your traffic. You've been putting traffic 10 to 20%. You know how much that is, and you pay it down to 7% or for the reporting date and 0 on the due date. If that money can come from a credit, then you have basically prepared every single one of your credit accounts that report to your credit profile. You have indicated positive borrower behaviors in relationship to every one of those lenders, and you can even do this with your service providers. Now, this money is now, it's still touchable. For example, if you need to fix the car, if there's an emergency, you can run more traffic, and I'm saying emergency, you can run the traffic because you have a credit. I want to do everything in my power. I want you to do everything in your power to continue to make, to continue to have 6 months worth of savings, pocketed away, squirreled away at every single one of your service providers and every single one of your lenders, especially those that report to your borrower profile. The elegance of this is that you are now showing good faith. Now, I always tell you what I know and what I know, what I don't know, and what dots that I connect. I do know that having 6 months worth of payments in advance allows you to not make a payment and still have a perfect history. It also continues to hit all of the underwriting guidelines for any future opportunities to raise a limit or get a loan or whatever. Now, since you've bankrolled yourself with all these lenders, you can lose a job and still all of your bills that you would normally tap your credit accounts for, all of your bills are already paid for month after month after month for a full 6 months. Minimum 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever you have the ability to do. But I'm telling you, no credit profile that I'm aware of has ever suffered, and most that I have experienced firsthand or in my coaching have all excelled by doing this model. It is not a savings plan where you have access to the money and then you are paying bills and you're scared that, and you might be using your credit lines and you're drawing down more money than you used to. If you have a credit with the credit cards, and this goes for business and personal, if you have credits with each one of those, you also have the ability to use more of that money. Now they're going to track your behaviors. They're going to see what you're using, but the payment comes from money that it's actually on their books. So The best way to avoid being having negative indicators during a recession or having a contraction of your credit accounts is to just hit the bullseye or that next outer ring on your traffic patterns that we've discussed in this podcast. Keep it there. If you're going to play with something, play with it over on the business side. But I still tell you, in the build phase, on the business side, you still want to establish awesome borrower-lender relationship. So the activities should stay the same over there, but they can be a little more liberal. Okay. So if you like what you're hearing, comment in the comment if you have questions or otherwise. Bring them with you to the boot camp, right? Let's go to getfundable.com. We're always looking at questions from borrowers out there. If you have a question or otherwise, tell them what episode you listen to, and let's have a chat. Happy to have me and my team address any ideas or thoughts about what you're hearing on this episode or any episodes of the Get Fundable podcast. This is Merrill Chandler, your host of the thing that I love to do the most. Have a spectacular rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to the Get Fundable podcast. Please leave comments because Merrill would love to read about your aha moments from this episode. And be sure to visit getfundable.com to read our blog, get important links, join our community, and much, much more, like ordering Merrill's tell-all book that is changing the world, The New F Word. And you got to tell your friends about this podcast because we want them to get fundable too.